Hello, everyone. Really excited to be doing this today. Really excited to be joined by Maria Ledinskaya from the Conservation and Museums Advisory Service. And we're going to chat today about being agile in museums. So welcome, Maria. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Welcome. Nice to
It's
see you, Belinda.
It is. It's lovely. And Maria and I have crossed paths. We've both got a real passion for agile and lean and its adoption within museums. So we've organised this chat today to chat more about it and share some of that with you. Maria, thank you for being here. And yeah, tell us about you. Tell us about who you are and what you do at the Conservation and Museum Advisory Service. It's brilliant work you do.
Yes. Sure, yes. Yes, my name is Maria. I'm a conservator. I trained as an objects conservator, but then through my work, I veered also into preventive conservation. So now I kind of feel like I have two specialisms, objects conservation and preventive conservation. My experience has been mostly working in museums as a museum conservator, and I've worked in both large and small museums, and both in the UK and abroad. But most recently, about 6 months ago, I joined the Conservation and Museums Advisory Service here in Wiltshire. So we are part of Wiltshire Council. But essentially, our kind of work is twofold. We have labs, which you can see here in the background. So I do a lot of kind of practical remedial work for various clients, sometimes museum clients, sometimes private, sometimes like archaeological organizations, heritage organizations. So that's like one side of it. So there's always like objects and different projects coming in and out, all sorts of different things, archaeological, historical, art objects. But also another sort of side of our work is the advisory work that we do with museums in the area and kind of more widely nationally, when we go on site and we kind of give advice to museums or give training to museums, and it's like a lot more sort of tailored and like working within their constraints and sort of with their staff and things like that. So it's really good. So I kind of feel like I still have like my kind of feet in both camps. So I'm still doing object conservation and I'm still doing preventive conservation, although the preventive is more for like other museums rather than like my own collection. So yes.
Yeah, yeah. So what got you into Agile? How did that come about? What got you into sort of how did that cross your path and get into that?
Yeah, that was sort of interesting. So basically about maybe about 5 years ago, I was working at the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts, which is a museum in Norwich. It's part of the University of East Anglia. It's a university museum. And I was sort of like just beginning to plan this like large project for the conservation of the Morris collection of constructivist art. So this collection it came to us from like a private donation from like these two private collectors who collected a lot of like British constructivist art, and it was bequeathed after they died. And it was basically we came in and rescued it from this like private home, which was not in very good state. With like kind of the collection wasn't like very well documented. It had like lots of unknowns. We basically didn't know exactly how many pieces we were getting, what it was. It was just this kind of like sprawling beast. So I already knew that I would be working in this kind of quite uncertain situation where my curatorial colleagues would be kind of doing the research at the same time as I would be managing this really kind of extensive conservation project, because a lot of the work was not in a displayable condition. And so this was around like 2019, sort of time, and we got some project funding for this project, which was also limited. It was less than what I wanted, so I knew that I would kind of
Yeah.
have to work with that. There were also sort of some funders have like requested accredited conservators to act as consultants on the project, which would also kind of eat into our budget. So I had to kind of balance that with what we actually had to deliver. So all of this was sort of happening. So we started the project. I kind of worked out the finances. I had some project conservators kind of coming in and doing condition checking and working on this collection and unpacking and kind of preparing sort of treatment notes. And then COVID hit. So that was kind of threw another spanner in the works for us. So suddenly everything was up in the air. We had to stop the project. We were lucky that we were sort of towards the end of the condition checking stage. But then suddenly we were kind of thrown in this very uncertain environment where it was kind of our funding was affected, our scheduling was affected. It had an effect on staff, kind of not everyone could continue with the project. I couldn't tell people when they would be able to resume, when they could get paid, those sorts of things. So it was a pretty stressful time. But then basically I kind of felt that in this environment, it doesn't make sense for me to kind of do any sort of detailed planning because it's just gonna be thrown out of the window in the next months. So instead I kind of naturally gravitated towards this kind of more short-term planning system where I kind of had the bigger overview of what we needed to achieve and what my managers kind of wanted to get out of the project and the funders requirements and those sorts of things. But then within that I was just kind of planning within okay, we think we're going to be okay for the next few months. So we're going to focus on this and this and this. This is a higher priority. This is a lower priority. It was we had to manage distance working. So it's today, only this one person can be in the lab. This means that, work on paper objects would need to be pushed into next week and so on and so forth. And, we did a lot of kind of online meetings, kind of like this with the consultants and things like this, So, but it was actually despite all this uncertainty, I kind of really enjoyed working on this project, and it was the outcomes of it were really successful. I kind of felt that we achieved a lot with our sort of limited resources. And when I finished the project, because I was sort of completing my master's at the time, I wanted to write about it, but I wasn't sure kind of what angle to kind of pitch it at, how to write about it. So I started looking into project management literature, and that's when I started reading about Agile and Lean, and it just all kind of fell into place. So I sort of feel that even though I wasn't planning to do the project in an agile way, because in many ways it's kind of the common sense approach when you're working in an uncertain environment. A lot of the things just kind of worked out that way. So it was a really light bulb moment, and just looking into the literature, which most of the literature was from the kind of IT world, tech world, some from the manufacturing, but I could see that within this project I was basically acting as a kind of scrum master, so I was kind of just looking after this sort of this kind of quite flexible process, but I wasn't sort of the main decision maker, and the decision making was kind of done more by the museum, by the senior management and the curatorial team. So they were kind of would fit into this product owner sort of role. And then we had our sort of accredited conservators who were acting as consultants on the project, and I could see that they were subject matter experts, but at the same time I really liked the way they worked with the project conservators that were that were kind of managed directly by me, in a way that was almost like what in the kind of tech world is like called like pair programming. So like, they were kind of
Yeah.
making the decisions together, the technical decisions. And I thought that was actually one of the sort of successful aspects of the project. So basically, like all these things kind of made me think like, this is great, like this is like, all these things that, I was kind of taught were sort of like not right, or like, not properly structured, were actually the strengths of the project. So after that, I was like converted, and I sort of continued down that path.
Were you, I get a lot of feedback that sort of people say, oh, this is how I like to work, and now I can call it something I can have. So rather than that kind of traditional, predictive, linear kind of project, which doesn't work when you don't know what you don't know, and there are
Yeah.
unknowns and
Yeah.
uncertainties, that you tend to start taking this natural approach, and then you sort of discover Agile and Lean and go, this is what I'm
Yeah.
doing, and now I can call it something and give it some structure, which then helps to get that
Yes.
buy-in and helps with that
Mm.
collaboration and helps getting people on board. So it's,
Mm.
yeah, like in that sense of like what does it, what does it mean to you? What does being agile or
Mm.
using lean, what does that mean in terms of your work and what you do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, some of it is like what you've kind of just mentioned, that you don't know what you don't know. So to me, like a really core thing about Agile is that we learn by doing. So this was kind of like a thing that I took away from this kind of a whole experience with the Morris collection and kind of other work experiences, is that like kind of over investing in this sort of like big planning in the beginning when there's a lot of unknowns, often, kind of people like psychologically this kind of like illusion of certainty that it gives.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
on a practical level, a lot of the time it's kind of a waste of time, because then you end up changing things and a lot of things kind of go out of the window and you have to sort of go back to the drawing board. So this kind of aspect that, like, I feel like is kind of really core to the sort of agile mindset. Like, we learn by doing. So let's have like a kind of like a broad idea of where we want to go, and then we sort of review, like in sort of shorter sprints as we learn more about, like, our object, our project, our building, all of these things. And then to me also, like, it sort of goes hand in hand with like the kind of lean philosophy, which also kind of I've sort of got really into when I was doing the research for my master's thesis, which is all about like reducing waste, and that could be waste in a sort of procedural ways in terms of your processes. It could be kind of thinking about how you organize your space in the lab or in your
Yeah.
building. Do you waste a lot of time, like, walking from like room to room, opening doors, like those sorts of things, so it could be like all sorts of things, but basically just kind of like, and constantly, within like lean project management, this idea of kind of perfection, but not in a sense of perfectionism, but like always trying to simplify the process. So it's kind of, in a way, it's never set, it's never like fixed. So, like you simplify it, and then you sort of see how it goes, and then you sort of like streamline and simplify again. So you're kind of constantly moving towards simplicity. So this is also kind of something that I try to like embrace in my work, and just kind of like try to like cut out all the fat from the sort of the processes. And the other thing is that I think that both agile and lean are really kind of value driven systems. So so that's important to me, that in my work I try to focus on what brings value, which sometimes is a kind of a tricky area to navigate in conservation, because a lot of kind of conservators of my generation or older were kind of taught in quite traditional ways, and with a lot of emphasis on research and documentation and those kinds of things, which are important things from an ethical point of view. But then you kind of go into the field and you find out that the private clients often don't care about like, you know, like very kind of like detailed documentations. And in the museum world as well, it's sort of like something that the museum institution kind of doesn't value. Like it values a bit, but like, you know, that's not like the kind of the purpose of being a conservator, you know. So we're not administrators, you know, like
Yeah, that reminds me
we
of the like the working solutions over comprehensive documentation. Like the documentation's really important, but actually
Mm,
we need to make sure we've got a working solution
yes.
that we are conserving this and we're preserving it, and like while we might not, and coming back to that like continuous improvement. So like you know, initially, you know, we can test things out with learning, you know,
Mm.
and then we're continuously improving that and building on that. So it, yeah, it resonates brilliantly.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, yeah. Mm.
so what sort of things have you applied Agile to? Where have you used
Mm.
it? And Lean?
Okay, yeah. So you know, like this kind of Morris project happened where I just sort of stumbled into Agile and Lean. So then I was like, great, I'm gonna like try and use it in a bit more sort of conscious way. Very soon, like after that, I got a job in Hong Kong in like a new
Oh,
museum.
yeah.
Yeah, new museum of contemporary art and visual culture called M Plus. And I moved to Hong Kong and kind of started working there. And M Plus, so this was around sort of 2021. I moved in September. The museum opened in November.
Wow.
Also, like in this kind of like background of like kind of COVID lockdowns and things like that. So I was suddenly kind of working in this again, like very like um environment where there was a lot of change, and you know, like it was very
So
dynamic. And
it's a new museum.
yeah,
It's yeah.
exactly, new museum, very large, you know, brand new building that you know, we just kind of moved in and we're just kind of figuring out how it works, all of us, you know, like us from the collection side, the building engineers as well, you know, like we were just kind of like new. And also like the museum itself was kind of discovering what it was trying to do, what kind of exhibitions worked, you know, like kind of what audiences it wanted to attract. So it was just kind of like this moving thing, like for like the first few years. So I kind of felt that like, you know, like this is very good, you know, like kind of environment to work with, like kind of like lean and agile systems. I was also kind of working as an objects and preventive conservator, so I had a lot of responsibilities across both kind of fields, a lot of competing priorities, new things kind of coming in all the time. So but you know, like I was lucky that I had a manager who was you know, I kind of pitched sort of these like agile ideas to him, and he was very interested and gave me kind of room and an opportunity to develop some of these systems and explore them, which was great. So I started, one of the things that I started using was then Kanban boards, which I'm sure your kind of tech audience would be very familiar with, but in the museum world, it's like not something that a lot of people know about. But kind of like, you know, in its simplest form, it's sort of basically, you know, like your three columns of like to do, work in progress, and done.
Yeah.
And in a kind of analog board, like which I can see Belinda behind you, you have
Yeah.
some sort of version of that. But basically, yeah, you have like all your different projects and tasks just written out on post-it notes, and sometimes color coded, sometimes not. But you kind of put everything in your kind of to-do column. This is your backlog. You're always operating the backlog. And then you kind of reprioritize. You move just a few tasks at a time into your middle column. Like, don't let it get too long. And then, like, you know, as you get them done, you sort of like just move them aside to done, and you pull more work from your backlog. Yeah, so that like kind of like worked really well for me at the time, both in terms of planning work with the team or with the kind of junior staff that I was kind of mentoring. I was like responsible for, because I didn't want them to get overworked, and I didn't want to just kind of keep like pushing tasks on them, like, and like what, because yeah, you need to kind of prioritize. So we would sit down, we would have our shared board, and we would kind of talk about like like what's coming up in our to-do column and kind of how we need to like rejig it depending on the priorities, those sorts of things. And we'd have our regular catch-ups. So like every 2 weeks I would like catch up with the team, and we would sort of move things forward. And it also worked really well in terms of communicating upwards as well. So on the alternate 2 weeks, like I would sit down with my manager, I would open the Kanban board, I would report on what we've been doing in this kind of like preceding period. And, like he would usually have some ideas of new tasks that we should be doing. And then I'd be like, okay, well, where does this sit in terms of priority? Is this more important than this other thing that we were planning? Is it less important? What should we do? So again, I think that, yeah, in these kind of like really high pressure situations, it's something that works really well in terms of just, because you only have like limited time. So you need to make sure that you kind of put your resources where they would be like most valued. And I felt that this whole process really kind of sharpened the way that we worked at the time in the team. Yeah, like, and just I think in general, just kind of keeping that sort of agile mindset and like thinking about like what actually adds value and what is the priority at this moment. So yeah, so that worked really well. But I do feel this is kind of where it's sort of you need to basically kind of look at your environment, because now I'm working in an environment that's still dynamic, but is like a kind of a lot more established and sort of controlled. And the team here at CMAS have already like developed a lot of processes to kind of cope with our workflow and things like that. So I don't necessarily feel like I need to kind of jump in and chop and change everything. Kind of the things that work, like you don't
they
fix them, right?
work and they're
Yeah, but there are things like just kind of in terms of the mindset that I kind of try to keep in mind here in my current work, because so on the one hand, like a lot of the work that we do is project based, so things kind of come in through the door, and that's like we can't necessarily plan like a year in advance what's going to happen. So some of it is like just kind of dealing with these like little kind of pinch points and bottlenecks, and sort of in terms of like reprioritizing things, like which we kind of do in our team meetings. And the kind of lean philosophy also comes into it a lot when we're working with our museum clients, which are often smaller museums, often just kind of working within like very limited resources, both financial and also in terms of staffing. It could be like a volunteer staffed museum, or it could be a historical building with a lot of spatial constraints. So it's just kind of like, yeah, this sort of like more tailored approach. I think like, yeah, kind of like try to tap into that. And the other thing, but we haven't forgotten like the kind of Kanban boards completely, like, so recently sort of one of the things that we've been trying to advance is our kind of social media posting, and like kind of just promoting our work a little bit more. And in that kind of area, like, like the Kanban board has like kind of worked really well for like kind of our whole team sort of working together. If you want, I can show you, like kind of like how
because I think
how we're working.
that's it's a really important point that you've just made as well, which I just want to sort of pick up on, in that like your current role now, that there is processes and systems in place that work really well. And it's like going, okay, yeah, that's all working fine, but then it's starting to look at, okay, how could we improve that? How could we continuously improve that? Or if when things do change or things do happen, you've got this methodology that you can then go, right, okay, we can now start taking a bit more of an agile approach. So you can use it as and when it's needed. And I love agile in marketing and social media. So yeah, I'd love to see your see what you're up to there, because I think that'll be really good for people as well to see it practically. Because I think,
Mm,
we can talk about this loads and it
mm.
sort of all sounds great, but then actually showing people, a bit like you were saying with your team and leadership, is actually getting that writing on the wall and showing people is really helpful. So yeah, go for it. That'd be
Of course,
brilliant.
yeah. Yeah, let me just see if I can share my screen and jump
I think
to
this is quite a
screen.
nice way where if you're kind of thinking like,
Mm.
what works and how could I use this
Yeah,
our
exactly.
medium.
Yeah.
So this looks brilliant. So this is a little
Yeah,
Kanban tool that you're using.
exactly. Yes, like so I would just kind of explain what we do. So basically like these kind of like little like multicolored like kind of boxes are the equivalent of your post-it notes.
Yeah,
In this case, I've sort of color coded them like according to like these different types of posts that we might do so that we're not kind of posting about the same thing like a week, just kind of like because our work is so varied. I wanted to sort of show the range of what we do. So, so these are the kind of like general themes like lab work and science, object treatments, archive treatments. We have like also colleagues who do paper conservation and work on archives, events, training, museum development, site visits, those sorts of things. So then when we have our, like here, like, we have our team meeting, or like we have project meetings like every month, and then like we have like a team meeting and sort of like in between. But yeah, during like one of our group meetings, we would sort of just talk about work that's coming up, and I would just kind of quickly jot it down and like kind of put it in here in
yeah.
this our sort of ideas bucket, our to-do column. And then like every week, like because we want to kind of move at a sustainable pace. We don't want to be like all kind of posting like every day or like like especially when we're busy, those sorts of things. So at the moment we're sort of like going at about like 3 stories a week.
Right.
So I would sort of like drag some of these things into this kind of middle column,
Yeah.
as like we kind of sort of like moves closer to the date, and trying to keep like a sort of a balance of different work. So LinkedIn is sort of like our main social media kind of outlet, so like we would kind of write these stories. It's not just me writing, that's another thing, that it's like if you kind of work in an agile way and you just sort of work together on a kind of a culture of like what you're trying to talk about, what you're trying to create, what you're trying to achieve, what it is, like that you're basically trying to communicate, then the work can be kind of spread out between different people, and it's not overwhelming for just one person doing marketing. It's like all of us are basically, we all have access to this and we're all like working on this together. But yeah, usually like in our like every week, like in our Teams chat, hey, what do we want to like write about today? Some people would be out on museum visits, some would have like a cool object that they have conserved that they're ready to talk about, those sorts of things would kind of
Oh,
drag.
brilliant. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yes, then like if it's also something that could work for Facebook or Instagram, we would put it there as well, just kind of drag it over. Post usually like kind of on the same week, and then kind of done. And here I just kind of like in this column, I sort of like let it accumulate for a month until our like next meeting, and then we discuss what we've been writing about and how well these posts have been working. I do like a little
Yeah.
like debrief about like the sort of statistics and things, and it kind of informs our new ideas as well. So it's a kind of a nice circular thing. And then I sort of like drag it here into the kind of archived section. And you can see that here, just like the different color codes that, we're just kind of like trying to kind of keep a balance of things, and just kind of write about different things. So that's basically it. Let me
That's
just go
brilliant because
back.
like the color coding helps to kind of identify the different types of work that you're
Mm.
working on, and then so you can make sure you've got that balance when it gets to that done, like as everything come across that's blue, oh, we focused a bit too much on that, so
Yeah.
you can reflect and review. And
Mm.
also something I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago about is this thing that you can then um like they're sort of mapping through a new process that they're working on, and one of the things I said is like then your done column is like
Yeah.
your process, so you
Yeah.
can sort of say, oh, okay, we can repeat this now, so we can sort of reset things back to,
Mm.
from done back into to do again,
Yeah.
and run through it again. So, and she had this like,
Mm.
oh my god, that's brilliant, because like now
Mm.
if I want to do it again, by saving those dones, you've actually then
Yeah.
got that pattern that
Yeah.
you can follow
Exactly.
again.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and and the
Especially, yeah, if it is like, sorry to interrupt, like a kind of a repeatable process. So if you're
yeah,
working on a museum exhibition or like a sort of a project like this, like then yeah, like you can kind of like learn every time you do like the same
yeah,
cycle for
yeah.
sure.
And when you're reviewing your dones as well, like with your social media post example, you can sort of say, oh, that one landed really, really well. That got really good engagement. Why did that really good? Why did that happen? Can we do
Absolutely,
more of
yes.
that? How can we do more of that?
Yeah.
And we can also like look at the other extreme as well of like, right, well, we
Yeah.
posted about that. That didn't get any engagement. That didn't get anything. So like, how can we?
Belinda, this is exactly what we do, like
Oh,
so
brilliant, brilliant.
it's fantastic that it's like, without kind of like knowing any more about our processes, like you kind of like zeroed in on this. But yes, when we review, I have like, usually a picture of our highest performing posts that month,
Oh,
our lowest
brilliant.
performing post. And we kind of like just kind of like brainstorm about like why that happened, like what we can do more of. And again, it's just kind of like and it's important that we do it together, because then everyone's on the same page and we can all sort of absorb that information and kind of like tailor our posts so that it works better. Yes,
Yeah,
for
and it
sure.
gives that
Mm.
visibility that then things aren't just being held in individual heads or individual places. It actually brings
Yeah.
everything together so that you can then work. I think it does. It helps with that collaboration, doesn't it? And it helps with, and also, when leadership have shiny ideas, you can then sort of drop them into the board and go, okay, well, where does this
Yeah.
fit? Or it doesn't fit,
Yeah.
it's too out there, or whatever it
Mm.
might be. So, and I
Yeah.
think that's come
Flexible.
across over the years of working with museums as well, is something I do get quite a lot of feedback is people say it's great to show the leadership team and the
Mm.
management team, so that because there is this concept of kind of self-organizing, self-managing teams,
Mm.
and often, like, I think I mean what I've sort of heard over the years is that often, steering groups or committees and things will push in these ideas, whereas actually being able to show what you're already working on, they can
Mm.
then feed into that. So it just helps to reassure, I think, leadership that actually
Mm.
things are happening, things are moving forward, give them that visibility and that sight, and allow people to be more self-organizing, self-managing, and do
Yeah.
things and use, because when we recruit a team around us, we recruit them because they're good at what they do. So it's really helpful to be able to um build on that. And it's yeah, so it's like really cool. And I, like I say, I love the kind of, I think as well, whenever I'm teaching agile, I always say take an agile approach to agile, so don't try and big bang it
Yeah.
to everything, is actually look for
Yes.
those
That's very
areas
good.
where
Yeah.
you can adopt it and try it out. And you're doing that perfectly. You kind of, and it's like, right, here's an area where we can adopt it, we can use it. That helps bring it into the kind of culture and the working of the museum, so that
Yeah.
then when other things come up, people have already got like, oh, well, we could use that
Yeah.
thing
Bit
that
of a
Maria's been
blueprint.
using in
Mm.
social media and marketing. So it becomes quite viral, I think, often. And that really helps to kind of, and I think it does naturally lend itself to, like museum culture of collaboration and working together, and that limitations on time and budget and resources, and trying to do the best we can with what we've got.
Yeah.
Um, And yeah, oh, brilliant, brilliant. What do you
And also, yeah, sorry, like,
go on, go on,
like
go
just
on, yeah,
one last point, like, is the thing that I like about this kind of process is that, so in museums, usually we have to have like kind of annual reviews or your sort of like kind of mid the year review, those kinds of things. And you already have the archive of like all of your projects and the various things that you've been working on.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
for me, like it's kind of like went from something that I always kind of dreaded, and I was like, like it, and it kind of like, what have I been working on, kind of thing, to just like, oh yeah, there's been like all of this stuff, like so it's sort of, yeah, it becomes like very easy to sort of communicate also the value of your work and, like you said, like the visibility if in like a larger organization as well as the small one.
yeah. That interest is like tangent question, but that's interesting from that perspective of because I often talk about the idea that just one annual review isn't enough. Like it sort
Mm.
of comes, if you take like appraisals, by the time it gets round to your appraisal, you don't need that training anymore.
Mm.
You needed it 6 months ago. So I think one of the really good things is that it allows that kind of continuous appraisal and continuous review so that actually when you do get to that annual review point, it's bringing together lots of smaller reviews rather
Mm.
than trying to do it all at once. So I think that's a really sort of powerful thing
Yeah.
around actually making it because often we think about like running the museum, running the business, running the organization, and then stopping and
Mm.
kind of talking about how we're going to change, how we're going to grow, how we're going to whereas actually it's sort of bringing it into being this sort of continuous thing within the organization rather than something we just stop and do once a year. It becomes um
Mm.
yeah, it becomes much more kind of ingrained and balanced within that, part of my role is yeah, running and doing the day job and getting things
Mm.
done. But the other part of that is change and improvement as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I agree.
what do you like what do you think what do you think are some of the challenges around sort of
Mm.
adoption?
Yeah, plenty of those, like so it's yeah, good question. I mean, honestly, I think like one of the challenges in the kind of museum world and conservation world is that I think fundamentally you're dealing with different type of personalities compared to the kind of tech world, right? Like so I think that in heritage, it attracts people that are quite like often methodical, quite sort of structured types, often not really kind of motivated by making a lot of money. I
Yeah,
think they'll be
yeah,
very disappointed if they are, like, but kind of more like, sort of really kind of passionate about like history and social issues and those kinds of things. So, when I think about like these kind of like tech mottos, like, move fast and break things, like being the disruptor, all these, it's like you're almost dealing with like the complete antithesis of that, right? Like it's
yeah,
very different.
yeah,
So it's like in museums, we definitely don't move fast and break things, like it's kind of
yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
people would like quite sort of against that kind of mindset in many ways. So this is kind of like, I think, like one of the things that gets in the way of adopting kind of management methodologies or tools that come from the tech world, like because people kind of feel that it's they don't necessarily see how it applies to their job, like, and they, could be put off by a sort of tech jargon and like maybe also even sort of suspicious of the kind of impact of those sorts of methodologies on kind of people and also on like museum collections and objects. So, that there could be like these sort of perceptions that I've seen that it's like, oh, like Agile and Lean are just like about like cutting corners or, like not doing things properly or like just trying to make money and trying to like cut people's jobs out and like, those sorts of things. And it's not helped that actually sometimes within management, like it's sort of like sometimes, kind of managers like bring out these sort of like buzzwords about lean and agile when they're trying to make cuts or, sort of reduce budgets or those sorts of things. So it has this kind of like a bit of a negative connotations, I think, in our world, in the cultural sector. And there's also, I think, this thing where, I mean, like in my kind of like learning and in my sort of early career, I just haven't heard about like these kinds of ideas at all, like, so it's like all the books and a lot of the kind of papers, a lot of the things that gets presented at conferences and conservation, whenever like project management comes up, it's always kind of presented as a very like traditional project management approach. So a lot of the time people kind of think that this is the right thing to do, and if you deviate from it and you do something that's a bit less structured, even if it works, you kind of have this sort of feeling that you've done something wrong, or like, that it's like, you can't like talk about it or something like that, like, so there's sort of like it's a little bit kind of this sort of moment. And then I also think that sometimes, kind of people have these expectations that a museum should be a very sort of like structured and predictable environment if we just did things properly. So, but it's an illusion. It's not the case, like, so it's,
Yeah, that's something
yeah, it's,
we might be, in a perfect world. I know I've say this, that, yes, in a perfect world, we would have it all very simple, planned out, predictable, and straightforward. But is your world like that? And people are like, no. So it is that kind of, I think sometimes it's actually challenging some of those kind of limiting beliefs and some of those underlying kind of things that we think, that then when we actually, kind of question those and we go, oh, okay, but actually last time we tried to do that, did that work? No. So
mm,
we need to look at a different way of working. And
yeah,
I think, certainly the agile that I teach is quite different to the agile that you see in tech and how it's applied. So I think, we exactly what you're saying there really is that, like, yeah, this is how it's being applied in tech, but that's
mm,
not what we want to use it for in museums and art and heritage. In this sense, we're looking at preserving things and conserving and keeping museums open and keeping people in their jobs. And this is a way for us to work smarter and to be able to actually, because, I mean, I do hear these stories about museums closing and things like that, and it's heartbreaking. And it's, it's kind of like, right, you want to get in there and be able to say, okay, no, this isn't perfect, but we're
mm,
not in a perfect world. And actually, if we can take this approach, then we've got a much better chance of keeping things going than if
mm,
we take this other path. And
mm,
we've got that opportunity to learn and flex as we
yeah,
go as well. So
mm,
it can, and people do talk about how it can feel a little bit counterintuitive to start with, because we're kind of programmed into that, no, we must get it right first time,
mm,
or, oh no, it must be this way and it must be that way. But then when we actually sort of go, well, like sometimes I use the, like, getting on a push bike, did you get on a push bike and ride it the first time you did it? No,
mm,
I fell off loads of times. Well, you're expecting to get on this exhibition and for it all to go right first time.
yeah,
It's a similar kind of analogy. And
mm,
it's then when you start to have those reality checks, I think then that's when people start to kind of go, oh, actually, yes,
mm,
this is, I mean, at its most basic, it's a great way to kind of organize and prioritize your own work, and then look at how that can impact as well. So you talked about, some of those, how it works, what are those areas where you feel like it really works in museums and really does add that
mm,
value and helps to reduce waste, and like you
mm,
were talking about.
mm. Yeah, I mean, like, it's sort of, yeah, I've kind of like been sort of thinking about that, like, and I don't know, to me, it's the kind of value of these systems is that they focus on value, like, so it's sort of um it's about kind of like just kind of like changing your mindset to sort of show, because it's sort of, when we operate in this like largely kind of publicly funded sort of uh, sector, right? Like it's about kind of showing value, like the kind of heritage services, museums, they're always going to be vulnerable to like kind of economic downturns and things like that. Like it's not, there's this kind of perception that it's like, it's not like an essential service for a society, like, so it's, right now, like,
But well, playing it very much is, but yeah, their
it
opinion of,
is, it is, yeah,
what can be cut first, yeah, those things tend to go, don't they?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that is like, in terms of kind of thinking about like what value we bring as an organization and also as individuals in our work. Like in conservation, I think museum conservation, it's especially pertinent because there is this kind of perception that I've seen, like even in museum management, that, well, conservators, they just kind of consume resources, like they don't, do they add value? Can we do without them? Like it's this sort of thing. And I think, unfortunately, like the conservation profession, I think, I mean, there are some positive changes, but basically I think we can do more to show the value that we can bring to an organization. And then something that you touched on already, this idea of kind of minimizing waste, which could be like your museum bureaucracy or these kind of redundant systems that consume your limited resources without adding value. And like, I feel that it's like, these resources like could be spent much better either on like your staff, on supporting your people, or on essential collections care, if we can kind of pivot towards like a process that's a lot more sort of flexible and kind of has like less of those kind of like extraneous things that also consume our time and resources. Because I think that is also kind of part of it, like, when you have limited resources to work with, but you have this kind of overblown and kind of outdated process that you can't change, then you end up like, it ends up kind of costing jobs, and you end up like cutting out people, or you're cutting out like conservation services, or like other kinds of like kind of essential services in your museum, and then like it sort of leads you down this path that is quite destructive, I think.
Yeah.
And
It
also,
puts, go on.
yeah,
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 just sorry, it was pinging in my brain that, like it's that kind of having to do more with less, but also, be able to, because we have such brilliant band of volunteers within the sector as well. So, helping to, you know, bring in those other like using the board, if you have some people that were volunteering to do the social media and things like that, that you could actually
yeah,
use it for sort of managing that as well. It's but I love that kind of, you know, that you can sort of bring like conservation, or sustain conservation within museums so that
yeah,
actually it doesn't become like a stagnant, that's what we've done. It
yeah.
does allow you to continue that conservation and preservation with the museums. Would you sort of agree with
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. And I think that, like, we need to kind of change with the times, basically, like, so it's just kind of like, yeah, like, which can be difficult to do, like, and kind of can feel also, sometimes, like you said, counterintuitive or like kind of wrong on some level. But, I kind of feel like, kind of fundamentally, these kind of like agile and lean systems, they actually dovetail really well into some of the kind of these sort of new museum approaches. So right now, like we talk a lot about risk management in kind of collections care. We talk about accessibility, sustainability, wellness, all these things. I think that, like, which were kind of not really kind of on the agenda so much, like, even like kind of 20 years ago, like, but now it's sort of, like it's really kind of at the forefront. And to me, I feel that like that kind of actually works really well with lean and agile systems, like sort of like trying to kind of make both your work processes and, like your operations like more sustainable from like kind of environmental point of view, from a financial point of view, and also this idea of like kind of well-being and, this kind of less top-down approach and more sort of like a self-organizing approach and like kind of just sort of people being able to kind of have better balance and like kind of like more get more out of basically like of their work as well. So to me it all sort of fits together because these are the processes that are like based around sort of doing things in a less resource heavy way with kind of more prioritizing, kind of simpler processes and kind of making sure that people are not overworked as well. So that's
I think it's such an important part is, we can talk about growth and productivity and preservation and these things, but actually the health and well-being of our teams is so important. What we don't want to be using this as is a way where we get everybody working at like 150%. We don't want it to be that. And again, I think that can be a misinterpretation, or if it is applied in the wrong way, because like any process or tool or, you can use it in a good way and also it can be used in the wrong way as well, whether that's agile or whether that's like hammering or like a hammer or a screwdriver or something like that. It's like the way that you use the tool
yes.
can actually have a big impact. But I think the more I work with museums and the arts and the heritage sector, it really does align with those values and beliefs, and kind of puts things, in a more kind of we can do this kind of. I'm trying to get the words out of my head because it's in my head, but it is that kind of giving people the tools where in what feels like an impossible situation and actually be able to take those small steps and and find your way through that and find those solutions where the traditional kind of ways don't work. I
Yeah.
think so. Like one of my kind of last questions as well was around like what are your what are your favorite parts of agile and lean? What would be your what comes to your mind when you think about, if I sort of said what would you what do you love about it? What's your favorite?
I don't know. I think it's just kind of I think maybe just this sort of thing that like kind of focusing on what needs to be done, like so it's sort of like kind of feel like it's and also like kind of breaking down the process, like I really like kind of working with kind of Kanban boards and those sorts of tasks, like so it sort of allows me to kind of like just kind of break things down into sort of like more sort of manageable, sustainable chunks and just kind of like keep going. But also like if something else comes in as a priority, it's okay to
Yeah.
sort of switch gears and do something else. So I think that was maybe like, I mean, it was like really kind of, I don't want to sound like too preachy, but like, it was really like kind of eye-opening for me, like when I started like learning about these things. And because I feel like it sort of like opened up my practice, my conservation practice, and also just kind of like seeing my work like more in context of like like what does this organization kind of need, like how can
Oh,
I add more value,
yeah.
so it's so
That's sort of,
it's yeah
it's a question out of the blue. So like I'll give you a second to
yeah
think about it. But it
yeah
just pinged on my head. Like if you rolled back to like 2019,
yeah
like and you did it all again, but without agile and lean, like
mm,
how would that
mm,
um what would you be without
mm.
it? Would
Mm.
would you be without it now? Um
Yeah, it's an interesting question
Do you
because I
get my
think that
question? Sorry, I haven't
I think
phrased it
so.
very well, but
No,
it was
I
almost
think
like it came from that, like, okay, if you couldn't be
yeah.
agile, if you couldn't be lean, would that be okay? Would you stop? Would you ever
Hmm.
go back to the old ways?
I don't think I was ever really in the old
Old,
ways.
yeah,
Before
good
that,
point.
like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
but before that, I did always have a lot of like kind of anxiety that what I was doing was like maybe not right. And like, you know, and if I was kind of speaking publicly about my work, I would kind of try to kind of make it look a little bit more sort of like structured, you know,
oh,
even though the
okay,
actually the
yeah,
decision making process and the thought process was not linear in this way, you know, like um so you kind of present it as linear after the fact, which I think actually kind of happens a lot, you know, like when people sort of present projects, you know, in our world. But in reality, it was kind of like a lot sort of messier, and that's okay. That's just reality. So I kind of feel that, like, you know, like that is maybe also like one of the benefits that it sort of like allowed me to be kind of more honest about like what actually kind of like goes on. But like, you know, kind of have the language for it, you know, and just kind of like present it as just like, well, this is, you know, it's not anyone's fault. It's not due to like incompetence. It's not due to other things, you know, it's just because of how life is, you know, it just kind of like throws things at you. And I think that, like, you know, in 2019, it was a bit of an extreme case because we were dealing with COVID, and like, you know, the whole country and the whole museum world, everything was kind of like thrown into like this kind of chaos
yeah,
that, like, and you know, we haven't in Western, you know, kind of Western world, we haven't like dealt with anything kind of quite like that before. So I kind of feel that, like, if that hadn't happened and I was just doing my project in this kind of environment that was a bit unpredictable because of the collection and because of the funding and this and that, but still sort of within the kind of normal sort of sphere, like a kind of things. Maybe I would have just kind of not gone in this direction, you know, like maybe I would have just kind of just sort of like ambled along and kind of like managed things, and I'm sure like it would have still kind of worked, you know, like because it's, you know, I feel that like my practice has always kind of been agile. I just kind of didn't have the language for it, didn't have the sort of that kind of more like philosophical structure around it. But I probably wouldn't have kind of written about it in this way. I wouldn't have presented about it this way, and I wouldn't have kind of sought out these sort of new tools that have already been developed that, like, you know, like now work really well in my practice. So yeah, so it's sort of, yeah, it's a good question, you know, like, because it's, I haven't thought about it before, and you know, I think that um yeah, I probably could have done without having this knowledge, but it kind of having it really kind of, I think, took my practice to a different level. Yeah.
yeah. So that's a nice point in that, like, yeah, you probably would have got through it, but you wouldn't have had the results that you
Yeah.
did, and you wouldn't have been able to learn and share that
Mm.
as well, which I think is a really,
Yeah.
yeah, really good aspect of it. Is there
Mm.
anything that sort of pinged that you haven't said that you'd like to share, or?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's been a really it's been really good talking to you, and I must say that, like, you know, like I'm really happy that, like, you know, like you are kind of pursuing this sort of, you know, kind of developing agile for like our world, you know, like, because I think that all of these systems, they need legitimizing in some way, you know, like, so because
Yeah,
even now, even though like agile, you know, in the kind of other industries, you know, have had it already for like 20, 30 years. In the museum, it still feels like very new. And even like, you know, you kind of like, I would guess, like, you know, when you talk to most museum managers, they wouldn't know what it is, you know, like, so kind of having that, like, and you know, like our world, it's very, you know, it's structured, it's kind of quite suspicious of new things, it's fairly like risk averse in the scheme of things. So I think, like, yeah, kind of like having something like, you know, the way you talk about it, you present it, you make it relevant to like what people do. I think that's really good, and it helps me because now I can kind of point to like what you do, and like kind of say like, well, look, it's not just me, like I'm not just kind of like, it's not coming out of nowhere. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
that's great.
I think you're right. I think if, like if somebody watching this now was to go and Google Agile in tech, it would probably blow their brains and put them off because of the jargon, because of how it's sort of framed. Whereas the way that we're using it is quite different. We have adapted it and used it
Mm,
within the sector and within the specific applications, and some of those are digital projects, and they
mm,
are sort of tech
yeah.
projects. So that's almost where it started with me, was helping museums with tech projects, and then
Yes.
they were like, hang on a minute, we could use this in our exhibitions. Could we use this same method and process in our exhibitions? And it's like, yes, you can. And so it very much, that's where my sort of journey started, was first off helping museums and arts with their digital product, building their websites, doing these digitizations, especially through COVID as they were kind of going. But then, in the same way as really I had when because initially I was sort of supporting businesses to adopt technology and using Agile as an approach to do that. But then as a growth coach, business coach, I was then sort of saying, well, this isn't just for this. You can use it for these aspects of your business as well. And I think the same has happened with museums, is that I've sort of worked with museums, helped them with the tech side of things. But now, most of the time when I'm working with museums, it's coming in and it's saying, right, we're running this exhibition. We want to do it in an agile way, or we've got a lot of change and uncertainty going on at the moment, and so. And one of the things with the other big difference, I think, as well, is that, often you get like these agile certifications that sort of teach you the theory, but they don't actually help you apply it. So one of
Yeah.
my big things is when I'm doing, the training, is we're actually like, what have you got going on at the moment? Let's actually practically apply it to this event
Yeah.
or this exhibition or this conservation project or whatever it is that you've got going on, and how would it look, and actually helping with that. So I think that context and that experience is so important, and it's differentiating. And I have lots of conversation, when I do, I don't work in tech very much at all, but when I do work in tech, there is always a sort of question, those conversations of, no, this isn't the agile that this is a different flavor, if you like, and this is, it's not just one process that you follow. There's actually a number of things that you can use, and it's about working out, whether it's a Kanban approach or whether it's a sprint approach or whether it's a this approach or that approach. There are these different, sort of styles that you can apply and use, and really helping, it's a bit, I'm trying to think of like an example, but it's almost like I've got this lovely thing that I want to share with you that I think is going to be valuable, and then having those conversations to say where that can be valuable and how that you can apply it and use it. And I'm blown away because, it's from, people running little exhibitions through to preservation and conservation, marketing, volunteers, funding, all these amazing different areas. It blows me away all the time when, I speak to people that have been through the training, and then you're having a catch up with them and they're like, oh, we did this and oh, we did that. And, we had this one client I remember is pinging in my head where they were like, we've got this really, sort of shiny idea for an exhibition, but it's quite out there. We're a bit nervous about committing fully to this huge exhibition. So they ran like a little minimum viable exhibition. So it's that kind of, we tested it out. That exhibition became one of their biggest, best exhibitions ever. The footfall they had was astonishing, so actually how we can show that, like, by taking this more agile approach, actually you can get better results in the long run than you would if you followed a more traditional, predictable approach, because you can respond to those things. You can respond to that feedback and, oh, yeah, people are liking this, let's give them more. People aren't liking that, let's scale back on that. So we can actually respond to, what's happening real time, rather than just following the plan, and then getting to the end of the plan and going, oh well, if we'd done this, if we'd done that, it would have been better. Well, it's too late then, isn't it? We can't do anything about it. Whereas if we're taking a more agile approach, we're learning that much earlier on, and therefore we can make a change. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a thing.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
it's
it's been
it's really good.
fabulous chatting.
Yeah, it's really good talking to you. And actually, just sort of something that you said, like, made me think that, there is one point that I do want to make, and it might be like a good thing to kind of
Oh, a
finish on,
nice,
is that,
yeah.
like it's kind of what I've found, and, maybe like, you've kind of seen that as well, is that actually for museums, like a lot of the time, like what practically works best is a kind of a hybrid approach. So you're not like throwing the baby out with the
No,
bathwater.
yeah.
Like most museums, they have like this long history of kind of working in traditional ways. And actually, like I said, like with a lot of the people that work in museums, like they kind of naturally lean towards like these kind of like more structured ways of working. So for me, it's just kind of, like when I manage my projects, it's just kind of like looking at like which areas I can do in a more agile way, and which I just kind of need to go through the process. So like with the larger projects, I knew that, I don't know, like anything to do with procurement, anything to do with recruitment, like I'm not going to win that battle, like, so it's just kind of like, these things had to be, they took time. They were like, like they were very structured. There was a lot of back and forth. I'm like, that's okay. Like this is something I can change right now, and it's fine, like, but there are like other aspects of the project where maybe you have more autonomy, and you can sort of structure it your way. So and that has been kind of it's sort of something that, like I kind of like just took to like all the organizations that I worked in, that is like, well, like just kind of see where it can fit, so it's like, it's not, change doesn't happen overnight. And actually a lot of the time, yeah, this kind of like mixed approach, balanced approach is something that works quite well for museums.
I think that's a really nice point, because I think sometimes it can be interpreted that, oh, this is going to change everything, whereas actually it's not. It's saying, okay, these are the existing processes and tools that you're working with. This is a way for us to help make them better rather
Mm,
than change them completely. So it's not
mm,
like we're, like you say about the, throwing out the old ways. It's about saying, okay, these processes have worked for us, but they're not quite working as they used to.
mm,
How can
mm,
we adapt and evolve them to help them? And lots of little steps. So it's not
mm,
about big bang changes. It's not about,
mm,
and it is about kind of finding those little areas where it can really help. And I know you say about kind of recruitment and things like that, but actually, I've seen,
mm.
organizations adopt it within,
Oh, that's
you
good.
know
I'm glad to hear.
like we talked about appraisals, and how
Yes,
we can
yeah,
change
okay.
and how we can, work, and also, the impact of funding cycles getting much shorter. I think that's had,
Mm,
I know, I've worked in funding most of my life as well. We've gone from having 4 or 5 year contracts to having 12-month contracts. And
mm,
that has been a real challenge, I think. And I think one of the
mm,
things I'm really seeing Agile can help with is being able to respond to that, and
mm,
being able to keep people, kind of feeling secure, and again coming back to that well-being, that people know where they stand, they know what's going on, because the world has shifted so much. So I think that is, yeah, probably a whole other conversation, but it's oh, it's been
okay.
so brilliant hearing about it. And because I can talk about it till the cows come home type thing, but it's always lovely to hear somebody else to talk about it, and how you've applied it, what the adventures you've been on, and how much it's benefited those organizations that you're working with, and that it's been picked up by others as well, which is absolutely brilliant. And you've, from here to Hong Kong, so
Mhm.
which is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to hear more, then, I'm more than happy for them to reach out to me. And likewise, you're happy if
Sure,
anybody
yes,
wants to sort of reach out to you.
yes,
Obviously, I do the training and coaching and things, so I'm really happy to talk to people about that
very
side of
good.
things.
Yes.
And yeah, brilliant. I will,
Okay,
right. So thank you
great.
again. And I hope everybody's enjoyed watching this. Watch this. And if you've got any questions, feel free to fire them through. And we will see you again. So we'll say goodbye then. So it's
Thank you. Bye bye.